When we hear about the most dangerous criminals on death row, we often wonder, how did wind up getting caught? What crimes did they commit to warrant the ultimate punishment? Or less often, how do they even feel about it? Today, we will uncover some of the deadliest inmates, their manner of execution, and the crimes that sealed their fate. John William King, State, Texas. Date of execution, April 24, 2019. John William King was a white supremacist responsible for one of the most brutal hate crimes in U.S. history. On June 7, 1998, in Jasper, Texas, King and his two accomplices, Sean Berry and Lawrence Brewer, lured James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man, into their vehicle under false pretenses. The men then drove Byrd to a remote area where they beat him, spray-painted his face, and chained his ankles to the back of a pickup truck. In a horrific act of racial violence, they dragged Byrd for nearly 3 miles along an asphalt road. Byrd was conscious for most of the ordeal until he was decapitated and his body dismembered. The crime shocked the nation and played an important role in the eventual passing of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act in 2009, expanding federal protections against hate crimes. King was arrested shortly after the murder he committed, and in 1999, he was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. He spent 2 decades on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky Unit before being executed by lethal injection at 7:08 p.m. Central Standard Time at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. King refused to make a final statement, showing no remorse for his actions. However, he had previously written letters from prison expressing white supremacist beliefs, claiming that his execution would make him a martyr for the movement. Rodney Burgett, State, South Dakota. Date of execution, October 29, 2018. Rodney Burgett was a convicted murderer who had already been serving a life sentence at the South Dakota State Penitentiary when he committed another violent crime. His first major offense was an attempted murder and kidnapping case in the 1980s, for which he received a long prison sentence. However, it was his later crimes that sealed his fate. On April 12, 2011, Burgett and fellow inmate Eric Robert attempted a prison escape by ambushing and brutally murdering correctional officer Ronald R.J. Johnson on his 63rd birthday. The 2 inmates beat Johnson to death with a metal pipe and wrapped his head in plastic before stealing his uniform and attempting to walk out of the prison. Their escape failed when other officers noticed something was wrong and apprehended them. Burgett pleaded guilty to Johnson's murder and was sentenced to death in 2012. His accomplice, Eric Robert, was executed the same year, while Burgett spent 6 more years on death row before his own execution by lethal injection at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls. Before his execution, Burgett smiled and said, "Sorry for the delay, I got caught in traffic, but seriously, I love you guys. I love you. I'll meet you out there." He was pronounced dead at 7:37 p.m. CST. Billy Ray Eyrick, State, Tennessee. Execution date, August 9, 2018. In 1985, Eyrick was convicted of the rape and murder of a 7-year-old girl, Paula Dyer, in Knoxville. At the time of the crime, Eyrick, who was 26 years old, had been staying with Paula's family and was entrusted with babysitting her. Paula's parents were reportedly aware that Eyrick had a history of mental health issues and violent tendencies, but still allowed him to care for their children. On April 15, 1985, while he was alone with Paula, he violently assaulted her. The autopsy later confirmed that Paula had been raped, strangled, and suffered severe trauma, ultimately leading to her death. Billy Ray Eyrick was tried in 1986. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence that included physical evidence confirming Paula had been sexually assaulted, medical reports detailing the severe injuries leading to her death, testimonies from people who knew Eyrick and attested to his violent tendencies. However, despite efforts by his defense team to argue that Eyrick suffered from mental illness, The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated rape. Given the brutality of the crime and the suffering inflicted upon the young victim, the court sentenced Eric to death in 1986. Eric remained on death row for over 3 decades before his execution on August 9, 2018, at 7:48 p.m., where he was executed by lethal injection at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, Tennessee. He was the first person executed in Tennessee since 2009. Dylan Roof, State, Indiana. Date of crime: June 17, 2015. Dylan Roof is an American white supremacist responsible for one of the deadliest racially motivated mass shootings in U.S. history. On the evening of June 17, 2015, he entered Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, where he sat through a Bible study session for nearly an hour before standing up and opening fire. Roof murdered 9 African American worshipers, including a state senator, a church pastor, and a library manager, in a calculated attempt to ignite a race war. His manifesto, found later, detailed his racist ideology, solidifying his intent behind the massacre. After fleeing the crime scene, he was captured the next day in North Carolina. During his trial, he showed no remorse, representing himself in court and even laughing at moments. Roof was convicted on 33 federal charges, including hate crimes resulting in death, making him the first person in U.S. history to receive a federal death sentence for a hate crime. Although sentenced to death in 2017, Roof remains on awaiting execution as his appeals have been repeatedly denied, but no execution date has been set due to ongoing legal battles. Roof has never expressed remorse or regret for his actions, further cementing his status as one of the most unapologetic mass murderers in modern American history. Walter Leroy Moody Jr., State, Alabama, execution date April 19, 2018. Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was an American domestic terrorist convicted of orchestrating a series of mail bombings in 1989. Moody's motive stemmed from a long-standing grudge against the judicial system. His resentment began in the 1970s when he was convicted for possessing a bomb that had accidentally exploded in his home. This conviction prevented him from pursuing his dream of becoming a lawyer. Enraged by what he perceived as an unjust legal system, he sought revenge by targeting judges and legal professionals with mail bombs. His attacks resulted in the deaths of federal judge Robert S. Vance and civil rights attorney Robert E. Robinson, who were killed December 16th and 18th, 1989 respectively. Moody's motive was rooted in a deep-seated grudge against the legal system after a previous conviction in the 1970s. Moody was arrested and convicted in 1991 on federal charges and later sentenced to death in 1997 in Alabama State Court. He maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration and repeatedly attempted to delay his execution through appeals. And in April 2018, at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, Moody was executed by lethal injection at 8:42 p.m. CST. 83 years old, he became the oldest person executed in modern U.S. history. However, Moody refused to offer any final words before his execution. Instead, he remained silent, showing no remorse for his crimes. Despite his prolonged attempts to avoid execution, the judicial system ultimately upheld his sentence, bringing justice to his victims and their families. Eric Scott Branch, State, Florida, execution date February 22, 2018. Eric Scott Branch was convicted of the 1993 sexual assault and murder of Susan Morris, a 21-year-old college student at the University of West Florida. Branch attacked Morris as she was leaving campus, beating, raping, and strangling her to death before dumping her body in a wooded area. After the brutal attack, he stole her car and fled to another state, where he was later apprehended. Susan Morris was reported missing after she failed to return home. Authorities launched an investigation, which led them to her abandoned car. Her body was found in a secluded wooded area, confirming a violent attack and sexual assault with forensic evidence linking Branch to the crime. In 1994, he was sentenced to death for Morris's murder. He was charged with first-degree murder, sexual battery, and grand theft. His attempts to appeal his sentence over the next 2 decades were ultimately unsuccessful. On February 22, 2018, Branch was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. As the execution drugs took effect, Branch let out a series of screams shouting, "Murderers! Murderers! Murderers!" His protests against the state were among his final words before he fell silent. Robert Lynn Pruitt. State, Texas. Execution date, October 12, 2017. Robert Lynn Pruitt was convicted of the 1999 murder of prison guard Daniel Nagel while serving a life sentence at the McConnell Unit in Beeville, Texas. Pruitt was originally sentenced to life in prison at the age of 15 for his role in the 1995 murder of Ray Yarbrough, a neighbor whom his father killed. While incarcerated, he had a history of disciplinary issues and violent confrontations with prison staff. On December 17, 1999, Officer Nagel, a 37-year-old corrections officer, was found stabbed multiple times with a homemade shank inside the prison. A torn disciplinary report written by Nagel against Pruitt was found at the scene, leading authorities to suspect retaliation as the motive. Pruitt maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed by other inmates. In 2002, Pruitt was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. His appeals, which included claims of wrongful conviction and requests for DNA testing, were repeatedly denied. On October 12, 2017, after multiple execution delays, Pruitt was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Unit in Texas. Before his execution, Pruitt delivered his final words, "I'm ready to go." He then smiled and expressed love to his family before being pronounced dead at 6:46 p.m. CST James Eugene Bigby. State, Texas. Execution date, March 14, 2017. James Eugene Bigby was convicted of the 1991 murders of Calvin Wesley Crane and his 4-month-old son, Jason. Bigby, a former mechanic from Fort Worth, Texas, struggled with paranoid schizophrenia and believed that several acquaintances were plotting against him. On December 24, 1991, Bigby visited Calvin Crane's home, where the two men discussed a workers' compensation lawsuit that Bigby believed Crane was involved in sabotaging. After sharing a meal, Bigby fatally shot Crane in the head. He then drowned Crane's infant son, Jason, in a sink before fleeing. Later that night, Bigby killed 2 more men, Frank Johnson and Michael Treckle, but was arrested the next day following a standoff with police. During his trial in 1994, Bigby grabbed a gun from the judge's chambers and attempted to shoot the trial judge before being restrained. Despite claims of mental illness, he was found competent to stand trial and sentenced to death for the murders of Crane and his son. Bigby was convicted of capital murder in 1994. His lawyers argued that his severe mental illness should exempt him from execution, but courts rejected his appeals, ruling that he understood his punishment. On March 14, 2017, at the Huntsville Unit in Texas, Bigby was executed by lethal injection. Before his execution, Bigby turned to the warden and said, "I'm ready, warden. Let's go." He was pronounced dead at 6:31 p.m. CST Juan Martin Garcia, State, Texas. Execution date, October 6, 2015. Juan Martin Garcia was convicted of the 1998 robbery and murder of Hugo Solano, a Mexican missionary who had recently moved to the United States. On September 17, 1998, Garcia, then 18 years old, and 3 accomplices were driving around Houston, Texas, looking for someone to rob. They spotted Hugo Solano, a 36-year-old Christian missionary, sitting in his car. When they approached Solano, Garcia demanded money at gunpoint. Solano, who spoke little English, hesitated, and Garcia shot him 4 times in the head and neck before fleeing with only $8 from Solano's wallet. Garcia was arrested weeks later and quickly confessed to the crime. However, during his trial, he claimed the shooting was not premeditated and that his accomplices influenced him. Prosecutors, however, presented evidence of prior violent robberies committed by Garcia, painting him as a dangerous repeat offender. In 2000, Garcia was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. However, his legal team argued that his troubled childhood, history of abuse, and lack of education should be considered mitigating factors, but appeals courts upheld his sentence. On October 6, 2015, moments before Garcia was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, he apologized to Solano's family, saying, "I'm sorry. I wish this would bring him back." He was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m. CST. Lisa Ann Coleman. State, Texas. Execution date, September 17, 2014. Lisa Ann Coleman was convicted of the 2004 starvation and torture death of 9-year-old Devontae Williams, the son of her girlfriend, Marcella Williams, in Arlington, Texas. Coleman and Williams subjected Devontae to severe abuse, prolonged malnourishment, and physical torture. When paramedics arrived at their apartment on July 26, 2004, they found the child's emaciated body, and he weighed only 35 pounds, the typical weight of a 2-year-old. His body was covered in visible injuries, scars, and ligature marks, indicating long-term abuse and restraint. The autopsy confirmed that malnutrition and repeated beatings led to his death. Investigators later found that Coleman kept Devontae locked in a pantry, deprived him of food, water, and medical care, and regularly tied him up with extension cords. Coleman was charged with capital murder under Texas law, which allows for a death sentence in cases involving the murder of a child under 10 years old. Prosecutors presented evidence of Coleman's history of child abuse, while her defense argued that she lacked intent to kill Devontae and that his mother, Marcella Williams, was equally responsible. In 2006, Coleman was sentenced to death, while Marcella Williams accepted a plea deal and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. After nearly a decade on death row, Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas on September 17, 2014. Moments before her execution, Coleman remained defiant, stating, "I'm all right. Tell them I finished strong. I love you all. I'm done." She was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m. CST. Tommy Lynn Sells. State, Texas. Execution date, April 3, 2014. Sells was a cold-blooded serial killer with a murderous spree spanning nearly 2 decades. He claimed responsibility for at least 22 murders across multiple states, though experts believe the actual number could be much higher. His victims ranged from young children to adults, and his attacks were often random, sadistic, and brutal. One of his most notorious crimes occurred on December 31, 1999 in Del Rio, Texas, where he broke into the home of 13-year-old Katie Harris. Sells stabbed her multiple times as she slept, leaving her with fatal wounds. He also attacked 10-year-old Crystal Surles, slashing her throat, but she miraculously survived and later identified him, leading to his arrest. His other known murders include the brutal stabbing of 9-year-old Mary Beatrice Perez in 1987, the slaughter of an entire family in Illinois in 1987, the murder of 13-year-old Stephanie Mahaney in Missouri in 1997. Sells was a drifter, using his transient lifestyle to evade capture for years. His confessions to multiple unsolved homicides have left many questions unanswered, with authorities still unsure of his full body count. He was arrested in 2000. Sells was convicted for the murder of Katie Harris and sentenced to death. He later admitted to additional killings, including sexual assaults and home invasions, but many of his claims remain unverified. Sells' last words was, "I speak no evil, I see no evil, I carry out no evil." He declined to make further statements before being executed by lethal injection on the 3rd of April, 2014. Ricky Gray, State, Virginia. Execution date, January 18, 2017. On January 1, 2006, Ricky Gray and his accomplice, Ray Dandridge, embarked on a deadly home invasion in Richmond, Virginia that would become one of the most horrifying family murders in the state's history. Their target was the Harvey family, a well-known and respected household. The victims, Brian Harvey, 49, a musician, Catherine Harvey, 39, a store owner, and their 2 young daughters, Stella, 9, and Ruby. 4 were brutally attacked inside their own home. Gray and Dandridge tied the family up in their basement before beating them with a hammer and slitting their throats. The couple's 2 daughters, Stella and Ruby, suffered the same fate. To cover up their gruesome crime, the killers set the house on fire before fleeing the scene. The shocking murders sent waves of fear through Richmond, as the brutality of the attack seemed senseless and merciless. Days later, Gray and Dandridge struck again, killing Mary Baskerville Tucker, her husband, and their daughter in another home invasion. During questioning, Gray later confessed to at least 8 murders, including the killings of his own family members in Pennsylvania years earlier. His violent spree made him one of Virginia's most notorious home invasion killers. Following an intense investigation, Gray was arrested on January 7, 2006. He admitted to the killings and was charged with multiple counts of capital murder. In 2006, he was sentenced to death, with the jury citing the extreme brutality of his crimes as a key factor. Despite multiple appeals, his execution was carried out by lethal injection in 2017. When asked if he had any final words, Gray showed no remorse and simply responded, "Nope, let's go." He declined to make any further statements or express remorse before being executed. William Morva, State, Virginia. Execution date, July 6, 2017. In August 2006, William Morva was being held at the Montgomery County Jail on charges of attempted burglary. Claiming to be sick, he was transported to Montgomery Regional Hospital for medical treatment under police supervision. While at the hospital, Morva ambushed and attacked a sheriff's deputy, overpowered him, and stole his service weapon. He then shot and killed the deputy before escaping the facility. While on the run, Morva encountered an unarmed hospital security guard, Derek McFarland, and fatally shot him at close range. His escape led to a widespread manhunt, causing panic in the community. He was arrested the next day and later convicted of capital murder, escape, and firearms charges. His trial sparked debate over his mental health, with claims that he suffered from delusional disorder, but his appeals for clemency were denied. His final words before execution was, "I want to say that I love my family and I love my friends." Morva was pronounced dead at 9:15 p.m. EDT. Terry Edwards, State, Texas. Execution date, January 26, 2017. On July 8, 2002, Terry Edwards and his cousin Kirk Edwards entered a Subway restaurant in Dallas, Texas, with the intent to commit robbery. Terry had previously worked at this particular Subway location, but was fired under controversial circumstances. During the robbery, 2 employees, 34-year-old Tommy Walker and 26-year-old Mickle Goodwin, were shot and killed at close range. The gunman fired multiple shots, execution style, before the assailants fled with approximately $3,000 in cash. The victims' bodies were discovered later in the back of the restaurant, and the crime scene showed no signs of a struggle, indicating that the employees had likely been complying when they were executed. Although both Terry and Kirk Edwards were involved in the crime, disputes arose over who actually pulled the trigger. The prosecution argued that Terry was the shooter, citing witness testimonies and forensic evidence. However, the defense maintained that Kirk was the one who fired the fatal shots. and that Terry was wrongfully convicted under Texas law of parties, which holds accomplices equally responsible for capital crimes. The case became controversial due to allegations that Terry received inadequate legal representation and that racial bias may have influenced the jury's decision. His defense attorneys were accused of failing to call key witnesses or challenge the evidence effectively. Despite appeals and petitions for clemency, his sentence remained unchanged. Edwards was arrested shortly after the murders and convicted of capital murder in 2003. He spent nearly 15 years on death row before being executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His last words was, "Yes, I made peace with God. I love y'all." He died at 10:17 p.m. Central Standard Time. These are just a few of the deadly inmates who faced execution for their heinous crimes. If you are interested in learning about cases similar to this, hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime insights.